The corruption wrecking ball Australia needs in Parliament, and hate crimes hoax. Coming up on this week's episode of the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 20th of March 2025. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by Citizens Party researcher and writer Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's show, we're going to be talking about the best qualified candidate for Parliament in Australia in this election, bar none. Because the number one issue is the cost of living, and this candidate, who is the Citizens Party's candidate, Senate candidate for New South Wales, knows where all the corruption lies that's causing the high cost of living, and we'll show you that. Second thing we're going to talk about is we mentioned it last week, Richard, but I wanted to discuss it more in depth. The horrible hate crimes laws we've got now, which are very, very draconian, all based on this hoax about the caravan with explosives, which was part of this wave of anti-Semitism that was just fabricated by persons to be confirmed, but certainly a hoax. So we'll get into that. First, remember, we don't do information just for information's sake. This is about exposing and changing things. You can help with that. And now that we're in election mode, we need as much exposure as possible, and you'll see that with our first story. So what you can do to help is get this show around. Like it, share it on social media, subscribe to it if you haven't already, and remember to ring the bell icon if you do. Comment below and give us feedback, and we try and engage with those comments, and donate. We're in full-blown election mode and it's very expensive and we need all the financial support we can get. There's a donate button down below. All right, and we have a bit of a time shortage today, so we're going to try and do this efficiently, but a couple of really quick updates before we get into the main stories. One is, Richard, Lisa and I discussed last week how Australia went to America to try and escape the tariffs, the Trump tariffs, and offered them our super to make America great again. Well, it didn't work, but what are we doing with that super?
Well, they're going to invest it in. American industrial projects.
Still, even though we've still got the tariffs?
Yeah. They went and had this powwow in Washington, and it's the usual thing. We sign everything over and then find out we're not going to get anything out of it.
Yes. So they still get our super to make America great again, even though the whole pitch didn't work. That shows you what little self-respect Australia actually has as a nation. We're so subservient to these foreign powers. It's not funny. And then you had a comment about the precious minerals that Andrew Hastie is talking about. We should offer America our precious minerals as well.
Yeah. And then, so it's reported in the Financial Review today that there was a meeting where they discussed that, some Australian super officials and Ambassador Rudd and these others. And the US Commerce Secretary Lutnick basically said, well, you already signed all that over to us in the deal you did with Biden. So, what's new? What else you got?
Now, that's actually the point we made last week,
yeah.
But it shows you maybe Lutnick watches our show. No, well, it's just true. They know they've already got them, right? We are just shameless lackeys. So we've done a Ukraine before Ukraine did it, right? All right. That's the kind of, that's why with Citizens Party's campaign is we need an independent foreign policy. So just stand up on your own 2 feet and have some self-respect, for crying out loud. Also, another quick thing, I want to play a video that's of a protest in Sydney last weekend by the Alawite community. Now, the Alawites are a faction of Syria. They're a
religious sect.
They're a religious
minority religious sect.
And as predicted, now, as long as Richard Bardon here has been writing for the Australian Alert Service, he's been writing about Syria. And that's just a fact. We were documenting this regime change operation in Syria as soon as it started and forecasting that if it ever succeeded, you would have massacres of these minority groups that the Assad government was actually protecting from these mad ISIS head choppers. Well, now the mad ISIS head choppers, backed by the Brits and the Americans and the French and the Saudis, are in power.
And Australia.
And Australia, that's right. 2016, it was 2016, I think, we
bombed the Syrian army to help ISIS. Didn't tell the pilots.
We bombed the Syrian, that's right. Exactly.
Just here's your target, and when they found out that one of them had a breakdown over it, apparently.
So, but true to form, Richard, the massacres are happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the official death toll is crap.
It's much bigger than they say.
It's a lot bigger, several times bigger, and it would have been a lot worse if the Russians hadn't thrown open the gates of the remaining base in the area and let all these thousands of Alawite and Christian. They were going after Christians too. Most of the toll this time was in the Alawite community. And the base commandant basically said, I don't care if you're the government, I'll incinerate anybody armed who comes near this compound. And so they backed off. Otherwise it would have been a hell of a lot worse.
But there's thousands of Alawites that have been massacred just in the last couple of weeks. I have a personal connection to this because my son plays soccer with a boy. He's a really important member of the team from an Alawite family, and I've been talking to them. So what I want to do is play the video of Senator Gerard Rennick addressing this protest in Sydney last weekend, last Sunday, and Senator Rennick. What they do is they play two videos actually, but you're just going to hear the audio of Senator Rennick was the first senator in Parliament to actually question this whole agenda in the last sitting of Parliament. We played his whole question at the time on this show because it was so historic, given that we'd all gone along with this agenda to, even though as he said, we're fighting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and backing them in Syria at the same time, right? And that's what he raised in Parliament. So they play that and then they play his actual remarks to this protest.
Our next speech is a pre-recorded message from Queensland Senator Gerard Rennick, who has been outspoken in Parliament about the plight of Syria's minorities. Senator Rennick visited Syria in 1998, years before the war, so he knows how beautiful and safe the country used to be. Senator Rennick is one of the few people in politics who acknowledges the role of foreign powers in destroying Syria, and for that we thank him. Before I play his message to our community, I would like to play the question that Senator Rennick asked of our government in February.
Has recently been overthrown by terrorists formerly associated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. There are reports these terrorists are abusing and killing Christians and other minorities. In 2012, the then US Deputy Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan, sent an email to Hillary Clinton saying that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Given the Australian government has previously condemned the Assad regime for its atrocities, why has the Australian government said nothing about the human rights abuses in Syria committed by the current regime? And is this because Australian foreign policy is controlled by deep state Western intelligence agencies more interested in imperialism than upholding human rights and democratic values?
And now we'll play the message from Senator Rennick.
Hi guys, Senator Rennick. I would like to lend my support to all Syrians at the moment who are going through a very hard time. What is happening in Syria at the moment, and has been happening actually for over a decade now, is complete and utter tragedy. It is a disgrace what has happened in terms of the West's involvement, as well as the funding from other Arab states that are seeking to undermine the good people of Syria. I hope that Syria can once again find peace and prosperity, and I wish you all the best of luck in your struggle to regain just that.
So good on Senator Rennick for doing that, and we'll keep an eye on this story and keep highlighting what you need to know, because where's all the human rights outrage now, right? And the reality is the Assad government was trying to protect these minorities. They were a secular country, Syria, where a lot of minorities lived in peace, and they had to be protected. and now it's been turned into this Islamist hellhole.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the main story. The corruption wrecking ball Australia needs in Parliament. And we're going to talk now about the Citizens Party Senate candidate for New South Wales, Dr. Andy Schmulo, but just give some context. And what we want to talk about is an appearance that he made the other day. This is actually a major election event. You're just not going to hear it on the mainstream media. But the reason I'm saying it's a major election event is because if you actually, all the things that we care about, the things that, not all the single issues that different factions of the country have as thinking, oh, I might vote on this, I might vote on that, but the universal issues, the things that affect us all, which comes down to the cost of living and the way that the economy is rigged in favour of big corporations against the people, that's a universal problem. It impacts everybody's lives, and nobody speaks to it like Professor Schmulo. But let's just profile first the nature of the problem, Richard. Australia is controlled essentially by a financial oligarchy. It gouges people at every turn, but it controls the oligarchy is above Parliament, outside of Parliament, and it controls the political duopoly, Labor and Liberal, inside Parliament. What is that? What is the oligarchy? There's a big four banking oligopoly. And as you've documented recently, it's not even Australian owned.
No, it's majority foreign owned, and the big four banks are all around 80% foreign owned, of which 60% roughly, on average, is American.
And that is the heart of the problem right there. All the evil emanates from outside of this banking cartel that controls everything. Right there, and that's why we focus on it so much. Second part of it, we have an airline duopoly, but which is an effective monopoly, and Professor Schmulo raves about that quite a bit. But there's different facets of it. I wanted you to mention just something briefly you highlighted the other day. Part of the whole picture is you got these privately owned airports now as well, and airport parking turns out to be one of the most profitable things in the world.
Yeah, they rank Melbourne is the cheapest, believe it or not. Anybody who's actually has ever paid for parking at Melbourne Airport
we'll find that hard to believe.
Only $15 for 30 minutes. Apparently, the most profitable for various reasons is Brisbane. But they were reporting that it's a 76-point-something% profit margin. Who makes 76% profit margin? Average profit per parking space of $5,000, I think it was $5,100 and something dollars per annum.
Average annual
per
profit
space.
Per space.
You think about
$5,000.
How many?
And you wonder why we have a high cost of living.
Yeah, and they can just charge whatever they want, because otherwise you've got to take a taxi to get there, or you've got to pay the privatised, overpriced train or whatever.
And that's not even the airlines yet. And the airlines, of course, do their own thing, and we have the highest domestic flight costs on earth, right? Really, really high. And in the last 18 months, Qantas has made $4 billion in profit, and it's just a joke. And actually, Andy Schmulo's argument is actually it's effective a monopoly because it's 75% one company, right? And the other one is just window dressing. Yeah. Virgin is just window dressing.
Bearing in mind that Qantas also owns Jetstar.
That's right. Then you have the gas cartel, which is a big part of rigging the energy market.
Yeah, because the way the market is structured, gas determines the price of electricity. It doesn't need to, but that's the way they've written the rules for the market.
And so even though it's our gas and we could actually be consuming it really, really cheaply and having cheap electricity, we don't. We're paying the most expensive gas prices in the world because this is an untouchable.
Well, the most expensive gas for a country that produces and exports gas.
We pay higher prices than our customers do.
In a lot of cases. At the moment, the spot price, the international price for liquefied gas is higher. So now they're trying to set up these import terminals to make us pay that, which is double what we're paying now, which is 3 times more than we should be paying.
All right, then you've got the supermarket duopoly, Coles and Woolies. And I remember years ago, we've had this duopoly for a long time, and it's been this untouchable thing. But I remember years ago when I was first looking at this, if you've ever been to America, you cannot escape Walmart. Walmart is everywhere, right? This massive corporation, and the Walton family who own it they're all on the top, 50 richest people in America and all that kind of stuff. They're all multi-billionaires, and so you see this massive thing. But in America, I think it's the top 5 supermarkets, including Walmart, have about 40% of the market, and here too have 70 or 80% of the market.
Yeah.
Right? And their return on capital is 3 times more than the bank's return on capital.
Which is the most profitable banking sector in
the
world.
So it's just quite extraordinary.
Oh, but we're not price gouging, no.
No, of course not.
Nah.
And then on top of that, you've got the big 4 consultants and auditors, which they just make sure all the corruption works for everybody.
Well, as exposed in the
gang.
PwC scandal, that again, Andy Schmillo's been one of the leaders of exposing, is that they write the rules, they get contracted by the government to write the rules, and they sell the services to their corporate clients of how to circumvent the rules they wrote for the government.
Yep.
I mean, nice work if you can get it.
And they dominate government with consultancies.
They run the international tax havens that let corporations spirit away their money and not pay taxes.
I may as well say here, by the way, that this, because I'm hoping people know this already, but this thing where Peter Dutton has decided, he said we're going to save billions of dollars by getting rid of the public servants that the Albanese government employed. No, what that means is he's going to go back to getting consultants for a lot more money to do the job that these public servants are doing.
Yeah, which Labor hasn't actually gotten away from. They just cut it down a bit.
And it was, but this was looked at by multiple Senate inquiries. We reported it was a total scam. What was happening? They would lay off good public servants who only get public servants' wages, and then give the same work to these consultancies for triple, quadruple, sometimes 10 times as much.
And keep doing it no matter how many times they failed. Like remember the quarantine breaches in Victoria during the COVID lockdowns, because Dan Andrews he ignored his public service who had a relatively sensible system in mind and hired KPMG to do it.
And because that's what you do. That's what it looks. That's what somehow these politicians have brainwashed themselves into thinking. That's where it looks authentic if you're getting these consultants to do it.
And this neoliberal nutbag in a red T-shirt that calls himself a socialist. And anyway,
don't get started on Dan Andrews. Our audience already is. All right, let me go on a rant now though, because like I said, this is you can look at all different facets of this. These are all corporations with way too much power, and everything is rigged in their favour against the people, against the consumer, against the customer. And it's the reason why the Citizens Party has a laser focus on these things. Right? We have to smash this power, and of course that's what we've been doing with our campaign on the postal bank. And we, over the last few years, as our regular viewers know, we have placed the post office People's Bank firmly on the agenda, and it culminated in the recommendation last year by a major Senate inquiry, the Senate inquiry into bank branch closures, that this postal bank, public bank / postal bank, should be looked at by the government. And so since then, I've been in discussions, that I'm privy to discussions, and I've been part of the discussions with people in both major parties, because the Citizens Party is not a jealous party. We want to get elected, but we're much more interested in our policies getting implemented. So if the major parties ever want to steal them, I'm not going to complain. I'll still take credit for it, for the party, and say, look, everyone should know the Citizens Party did that. But if Labor wants to adopt a post office bank, or the Liberals want to adopt a post office bank, good on them. Problem is, what we've now concluded after 9 months since that recommendation is it's never going to happen with those parties, because they are never going to be prepared to stand up to the banks. Never. And I can't give you the details, but I can tell you from the discussions that is absolutely evident, including, and then some of it is just they're cowards. That's a big part of it, right? They are completely controlled by these corporate entities. Another part is just they're not very impressive people. They are not up to the job. If you knew the person who last week was told by someone advocating a postal bank as one of the arguments, look, Australia's banks, as Richard just said, are the most profitable in the world by return on capital. The person, if you knew the person who was told that, who said then in response, really?
Yeah.
As if he didn't know, you would be absolutely shocked that this person has the position they have and hopes to become a big mover and shaker in Australian government. But this is the level of ignorance out there. They're just not very impressive people. So we have to smash that. Now, the Citizens Party has been laser focused, and a lot of people through word of mouth, not through the media, but through word of mouth, have been attracted to our fight. And now we've got an election underway. And so that brings us to Dr. Andy Schmulo, because on Tuesday this week, more than 1,000 Australians tuned in live to see him in action as the corruption wrecking ball Australia desperately needs in Parliament. Now, if you haven't watched it, we'll put a link below to the hour and a half discussion that Andy Schmulo had with Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics on Martin North's show. If you haven't watched it, you must watch it. Drop everything, watch this interview. It's really, really important. Prioritise watching this interview because you need to see just how capable Andy Schmulo is. If we got him into Parliament, he is clearly the most qualified candidate running in Australia today and one of the most qualified candidates we've ever had. We'll just play a little bit of a clip though. This is something that it's sort of emblematic of the whole conversation. I mean, he tells a story here about something that he discovered when he in the interview he talks about what got him into this sort of crusade he's on against corruption. And he starts off because he's a native South African and he watched what corruption did to South Africa. He did a PhD at Melbourne University and his PhD was on corruption in Indonesia under Suharto. And when he finished his PhD, he started seeing the things about Australia's banks that eventually led to the Royal Commission. And he couldn't believe what he was seeing. But I just want to play this one example he gives of just how crooked Australia is.
Professor Schmulo, you're an expert in financial regulation and you're an expert in the Australian Financial Royal Commission. We'd like to understand some of the things that happened in Australia. Can you please, my focus is insurance, can you please explain to me some of the deficiencies, I think as he called it, some of the deficiencies that were noticed in the Australian insurance industry? And I said to him, deficiencies? Is that some kind of euphemism? These bastards were charging customers they knew were dead life insurance premiums. As Commissioner Haynes said, you were charging life insurance premiums where you knew there was no longer a life to insure. I said to him, I gave him the example of ComInsure, part of Commonwealth Bank, the gold medalist for misconduct, how ComInsure was stealing money from the dying and the dead. I gave him the example of a woman who worked for ComInsure. She contracted multiple sclerosis. Now, as I'm sure most of your viewers are aware, multiple sclerosis is the most hideous terminal disease. It's incurable. Its sufferers always die, but before they die, they have a slow descent into the most helpless and undignified life where they can't take themselves to the toilet, right? This woman worked for these bastards at ComInsure. She contracted multiple sclerosis. She went to the HR department. She said, look, I've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. They said, oh, unfortunately, that means we're going to have to discharge you on the basis that you're permanently disabled. So she said, well, that's even worse. I mean, it's a double blow for me. I've got a terminal disease that will rob me of my dignity, and I've been discharged on the basis that I'm permanently disabled. But thank God, I've got death and disability insurance with ComInsure. So she called up the claims line and she said, look, I've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And they said to her, sorry, we don't regard that as disabled. She said, no, there must be some misunderstanding. I work for ComInsure. They've discharged me on the basis that because I've got multiple sclerosis, I'm permanently disabled. And you know what their response was? That's HR. We're claims. These people are cruel, they are wicked, they are venal, they are heartless, they are psychopaths. And the people who did this didn't get punished, they got promoted. And it formed part of Commonwealth Bank's overall profit so that Ian Narev could get a $13 million bonus in his final year. This is the Australia we live in. It is unbelievable and it is disgusting. And when I said this to this guy from the Bank of Russia, he said to me, we don't even see behavior like this in Russia.
All right, and like I said, that's just a flavour. You've got to watch the whole thing. And if you're in, and when you do, warning, Andy asked beforehand if he had to, how polite he had to be. I said, let yourself go.
And
he does. He uses choice language, but the language matches the rage that the situation he's describing warrants. This is not gratuitous, what he's doing. But the main thing to understand is behind that rage is a man who knows the details of where the corruption bodies are buried, because he understands the law, he understands regulation intimately, and you need that kind of person in there. And what Andy Schmulo and I share, Richard, having had so much experience with Senate inquiries, as we talked about on this show when I interviewed him for us, when you're involved in these inquiries, you get very frustrated that you're not the one asking the questions, right? Because, these politicians, plenty of nice people, but they don't know the details well enough. And if the Australian people want this kind of corruption addressed, which is just smashing our standard of living, we have to have people in there who know the details and can do the job. And that's why I'm saying there's no more qualified person in Australia in this election than Dr. Andy Schmulo. Work your butt off. If you're in New South Wales, work your butt off to get him elected, get involved in the campaign, contact the Citizens Party, but just through word of mouth. Take responsibility for word of mouth. Get it out everywhere. Tell people about this guy. And it's actually good that he's a Senate candidate, because you don't even have to convince people that they've got to suddenly fall in love with the Citizens Party. If they've got a preferred party, fine. But they should fall in love with the Citizens Party, given everything we've done. But they can, if they want to cast a protest vote even, that's the guy to cast a protest vote for. That'll send a huge message to the major parties.
Yeah, if you want to scare the hell out of the bank that ripped you off,
vote for Andy Schmulo.
Vote Andy Schmulo.
And tell everyone else to vote for Andy Schmulo. That's what people have to understand. And if you're not in New South Wales, you probably know someone who is in New South Wales. You make sure you let them know. Vote for Andy Schmulo. But make sure you watch that video as well. All right, let's move on. Hate crimes hoax. So, Richard, we've now got extreme, and I mean extreme, hate crimes laws, both federally and in New South Wales, and it turns out they were based on an outright hoax. Now, excuse me, our party has actually been fighting this phenomenon for more than 20 years. So the Citizens Party, after 9/11, in 2002, John Howard had 7 laws that he used the reaction to 9/11 to ram through Parliament, his first raft of anti-terrorism laws. And we fought them very, very hard, and we got the Labor Party to shift at a certain point in 2002. Anyway, it turned out they were just the beginning. And then through the years you were writing on Syria, you're also the one writing on every new round of anti-terrorism laws that was being introduced in those days.
Yeah, national security this, anti-terrorism that. There's over 100 now.
Over 100 now. What started off as 7 is over 100 now, right? So, and it's this sick idea that politicians have of never let a good opportunity go to waste. But what they're doing is, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Never let a crisis go to waste.
This is a crisis they've manufactured that we're about to talk about. So the laws we're talking about involve mandatory jail terms for speech that is considered threatening to certain groups, even though you don't have to prove intent, right? And when there was a motion put up to exempt under 14-year-olds from this law, so that stupid kids saying stupid things in schoolyards could not be included.
Or on social media or whatever.
Yeah, that was voted down. So it applies to kids as well. And mandatory jail terms for displaying anti-Semitic symbols.
Specifically, yeah.
Yeah. They've made it anti-Semitic, not just generally racial hatred or religious hatred, specifically anti-Semitic, right?
Which by their definition means criticising Israel.
Exactly. But there's already a carve-out. So before we get into the more details, have a look at the carve-out. I follow this account on social media, Alt Media Watch. And this guy has documented 2 cases in Sydney, just in the last couple of weeks, where the Ukrainian community, who are pro-Zelensky and of course anti-Russia, they can't hide the fact that they're actually bloody Nazis, as we've been trying to highlight on this show for the last few years. And so they're displaying these, if the flags you're looking at there, so in the first one, you might not see it very well, maybe we can zoom in on it, but there's actually a wolf's angle, which is their version of like a form of a SS thing slash
it's
swastika.
It's one of the old Germanic heraldic devices that the Nazis co-opted, and then the Ukrainian Nazi collaborators used that as one of their symbols and still do. Their sons and grandsons still do now.
And this second one is at a church service, and what you see is all the brown shirts, kids including adults, who I'm calling them brown shirts because that's what they are. It's this kind of Ukrainian scout thing that trains these Ukrainian kids in white supremacy, essentially, including here in Australia. But the flag that they're flying in this ceremony is actually, as you see highlighted there, is the Nazi Waffen SS flag, right? That's actually what it is. So now, under the letter of the law that Chris Minns passed in New South Wales, those people should be going to jail for a year, mandatory sentence.
Yeah, and a similar law already existed in Victoria.
Yeah, but nothing, right? Because the propaganda of Ukraine there's a carve out for that. But anyway, back to the hoax. So the hoax was centered around this story of the caravan with explosives in it, and you and I would have touched on this before. So they found a caravan with explosives, and politicians like Peter Dutton went off and said this was potentially the biggest terrorist attack in Australian history.
Chris Minns, mass casualty, clearly.
Mass casualty event.
Blah.
So by now you should know the New South Wales police have said, no, the whole thing was a hoax.
And the federal police.
The important thing is I want to play this clip from Media Watch. Media Watch covered this in depth on Monday night. I want to play this one part of the clip because what Media Watch establishes is the suspicion it was a hoax was reported from the very beginning this story broke. Have a look.
From the very start, however, there were clues that something was very wrong with this story. And the first of these was dug up by the excellent police reporting of the Daily Telegraph, which had quoted this warning from an unnamed source.
Some things just don't add up. Leaving notes and addresses are too obvious. Likewise, leaving it on a public road makes us believe it could well possibly be a setup.
The police had nagging doubts. This may have been a different kind of conspiracy altogether.
Why leave those explosives there? Why leave those clues there?
That's one of the lines of inquiry that we're pursuing, that they've left those there to be discovered by police or authorities, whether someone was looking for some assistance at court.
This critical detail failed to make an appearance in the commercial television news bulletins that night.
So what you see from that, Richard, is there is that whole narrative that exploded on the back of this caravan and everything that was being said about, because Albo is so pathetic. He didn't want to go along with this, but he's not capable of just putting his foot down and saying, cut the crap, you're making up garbage, this is likely a hoax, right? He was there when the police said it, but doesn't say. So Peter Dutton and James Patterson and these yahoos were able to run with this and say this is potentially the biggest terrorist attack in history, targeted the Jewish community because they found this, handwritten note.
Yeah, and in case, because I haven't seen the Media Watch thing actually, but in case it's not clear, it's not just the caravan. It's nearly every incident of anti-Semitic vandalism here, and especially all over Sydney. All the ones in Sydney were the same idiots for hire doing this stuff.
And even then, the police had started to say about those incidents, we think there's something going on here, because none of the people they were arresting had any ideological bias against the Jewish community, right? They
were petty crims.
They were meth heads, as Senator Jared Rennick called them, right? They've been paid to do this stuff, and the police started getting quite suspicious. But the politicians ran off with this and gave us the hate crimes laws. And let me single out those politicians, though. It was the Labor Party, it was the Liberal Party, but it was also the Greens. And to me, that's unforgivable, that the Greens, who have been out there defending Palestinian protesters, etc., would allow themselves to be ramroded with this agenda to pass this law, right? You only had 5 people in the Senate of the federal parliament vote against it when the law came down to a vote. Anyway, they're now trying to repeal the law in New South Wales, all the minor parties, including the Greens, which is to their credit, but they haven't talked about that federally yet. David Shoebridge, the Greens senator federally, has said maybe we should look at this, etc., in the light that this was a hoax, because these are such extreme laws. But as you said a second ago, Richard, the whole intent was quite simple. It was to shut down criticism of Israel. Because when you actually pay attention to what's happening over there in Israel and Gaza, you have to criticise Israel, i.e., the ceasefire has now broken down.
Yeah.
The Murdoch media is saying, oh, it's Hamas's fault. But the truth is,
Israel never followed the ceasefire. Hamas held off retaliating until the deadline that they had agreed to, because it turns out that Hamas has honour that Israel doesn't have.
if you will follow this closely enough, you will see that it's Israelis that are the biggest critic of the Israeli government right now for breaking this ceasefire, right? Because Benjamin Netanyahu wants a war, and the guy who's just rejoined his coalition because he broke the ceasefire is the biggest monster in Israel. An actual terrorist himself, Itamar Ben-Gvir, implicated in the assassination of Rabin, right? The Prime Minister of Israel in the 90s. He was implicated in the assassination of that. He's now the most extreme guy in the Israeli Knesset. He broke with the coalition because they agreed to the ceasefire. Now it's broken. He's gone and joined them again.
Started dropping.
Right.
They killed 300 and something people in a day.
So there's and of course they're trying to downplay that, and a bunch of children, etc. And what they're the most pernicious part of the narrative here is that the criticism of Israel has nothing to do with reacting to what's happening in Gaza. This is deep-seated anti-Semitism, which is why we needed these laws. That was the narrative. And now the whole thing's been blown apart by this hoax.
And Minns is still insisting on that.
Yeah.
And the Federal Attorney General is insisting on that. And it's, even though everybody can see it's nonsense.
Now I want to end because I want to end with some controversial history here. And you've just you know a bit about this, but this is the sort of stuff that you glean quite easily if you actually pay attention to the details. One part of the narrative that the people who don't pay attention assume is that the Hamas on the Palestinian side are terrorists, the Israelis are a nation just defending themselves. Right? That's the narrative. Well, this is what you learn from history. Look at this article from the San Francisco Chronicle on the 9th of September 1991. We'll put the clipping on the screen, where the American newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, reported the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Yitzhak Shamir, saying, terrorism is acceptable for Jews when Jews do it, not Arabs. That's exactly what he said. And one of the reasons he said that, Richard, is because Shamir himself started off as a terrorist. He was in these very notorious Israeli terrorist organisations called the Irgun and the Stern Gang in the lead up to the Declaration of Statehood in 1948. Actual terrorist organisations. One of the things those terrorists did is they bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946. To this day, the 29 Brits who died in the bombing of the King David Hotel is the single biggest loss of British life in a terrorist attack ever, to this day. Now I'm going to put on the screen here a motion that was put up to the UK Parliament in 2006 on the 60th anniversary of that bombing to commemorate and memorialise the loss of British life in the bombing of the King David Hotel. And have a look at it closely. I'll just summarise it. Keep it up there for a while, producer. Let people actually watch this, read this. Have a look at this. In this statement, the people who moved the motion made note of the fact that this was a terrible loss of life for the British, etc., etc. But they also made note of the fact that while they were memorialising the dead, there was a ceremony in Israel to celebrate the fact the attack had happened. And I'll get the producer to highlight this, Benjamin Netanyahu attended the celebration. Don't kid yourself that one side is lily white and the other side are monsters. This was in 2006, and those cowards in the British Parliament wouldn't dare raise this now because they're all behind Netanyahu's mass slaughter of babies in Gaza. Yet they know this is what a monster the Israeli Prime Minister and his bloody cabinet are. This is not about Israelis. There's a gang in charge of this government that couldn't wait to kill the guy who tried to get peace in the 1990s and rubbing their terrorism in people's face, the worst mass slaughter anyone in our time has ever been exposed to, thanks to social media, and we're not allowed to criticise it because of our cowards in Parliament who've passed these damn laws. That's what you should get mad about. There's been, if we had more time, I'd go through a whole history of terrorist attacks. In fact, we might do a show on this. Terrorist attacks by the Israelis. We might do a show on this one day. I'll just say, we're out of time. Don't swallow the one-sided narrative. We now have fascist laws in this country because people have, right? This is a terrible thing that's happening. Yes, it's complicated to a degree, but it's not that complicated that you can't take a stand on it. And that's what the cowards in our political system are trying to stop people from doing with these fascist laws. And if you agree with the Citizens Party that that shouldn't happen, join our fight and get behind us in this election campaign. Any final comments from you, sir?
No, I think you covered it.
All right. We're running out of time. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Citizens Report. As I said, watch the Andy Schmulo interview. Get it out as widely as possible. Give us a donation if you can, because we need your financial help. We've got to do all sorts of advertising on social media, etc. We're going to put it all to use. We've got a big message to get out there over the next, we think the election is going to be probably the 3rd of May. Big message to get out there. Get behind us and let's make this happen. Let's make a big impact in this election and scare the hell out of the duopoly that is helping this corporate mafia rig the economy against us all. See you next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.